they were the first to name you to the development squad. Just what were their conversations with you about just what that is and what your role will be?
Yeah, I mean, I think for lack of better terms, it's kind of a red shirt for rookies, and I'm super excited for the opportunity. I'm grateful that they even considered me to be in that position, so I think I'm just taking it one day at a time and really leaning into the process.
Everything surrounding Justine Pat and the latest updates from Indiana Fever training camp is starting to draw serious attention, and as more reports surface, the picture only becomes more compelling. Recent commentary highlighted by Chloe Peterson, whether in a live discussion or streamed breakdown, alongside insights from Tony East, Brian Hansen, and the consistently reliable Scott Agnes, has been painting a clearer view of what's actually unfolding inside camp. These are not recycled takes or surface-level reactions. They are grounded, real-time observations from reporters who are physically tracking the Fever's progress. And within those updates, one name keeps rising into focus: Justine Pat. She's quickly becoming one of the most intriguing players in the entire camp, not just because of her presence, but because of what she brings to the floor. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches, she offers rare size, yet moves with the smooth instincts and fluid control of a guard, and when her shooting rhythm kicks in, it has the potential to completely shift the tempo of the game. What makes this kind of skill set so striking is just how rarely it appears in modern basketball. Players with that much size who can reliably stretch the floor while still handling perimeter duties simply don't come around often. That unique blend instantly raises her value, especially when you place it within the context of the Indiana Fever's current roster construction. The team already leans heavily toward guard depth, with multiple primary ball handlers and versatile creators, and they also have solid pieces in the front court at the 4 and 5 spots. However, the clear gap sits on the wing, where there is a noticeable shortage of natural 6 feet 2 inches to 6 feet 4 inches players who can slide between the 3 and 4 positions, defend multiple matchups, and still provide consistent spacing on offense. In today's game, that type of versatility is one of the most in-demand profiles, and Pat fits that description closely, particularly because of what she offers offensively. Yet despite all of that upside and the obvious roster fit on paper, the situation becomes more uncertain when you look at the latest reports, which suggests that her likelihood of still being with the Indiana Fever in the coming weeks is unexpectedly low. The uncertainty surrounding her situation does not appear to stem from poor performance. In fact, the opposite seems to be true. She is currently operating under a developmental contract, a key detail that significantly shapes how her future is viewed, because it does not guarantee a permanent spot on the main roster, and within a short window of time, roughly a couple of weeks, other WNBA teams are allowed to intervene if they are willing to open up space and offer her a standard roster position, instantly turning her situation into a time-sensitive evaluation. That raises the most important question: how has she actually performed in camp, since that ultimately determines everything? Based on reports from Chloe Peterson and other close observers around the team, full scrimmage access has been limited so far, with much of what has been seen coming from defensive drills, structured system work, and controlled team sessions. Within those settings, Justine Pat has reportedly stood out in a positive way on the defensive end, showing real effectiveness and consistency, which carries added weight because defense entering the professional level was widely considered the biggest question mark in her overall game. At Vanderbilt, she was never considered a defensive stopper, with concerns often centered around her lateral quickness and whether she could truly keep up with elite WNBA-level athletes, making defense the biggest question mark in her transition to the professional stage. However, the latest reports are beginning to shift that narrative in a noticeable way. Her length, size, and exceptional wingspan are starting to create real disruption on the floor, allowing her to contest shots, cut off passing lanes, and impact possessions in ways that don't rely purely on speed. Even without elite quickness, that reach is compensating in a meaningful way, and that alone is changing the evaluation of her upside. Because if she can develop into even an average, reliable defender who isn't targeted on every possession, then her offensive value becomes even more significant. A 6 feet 4 inches player who can shoot close to 40% from 3 while holding her own defensively instantly becomes one of the most valuable archetypes in the league, something every franchise actively searches for. That's why the way the Fever are handling her situation is starting to raise questions. especially with reports suggesting the organization may have already locked in its final 12-player roster before training camp has fully played out, meaning players like Pat may not have truly been in a live competition for a spot, but instead brought in on developmental deals with limited expectations of breaking through immediately, which is unusual in a setting where most teams typically allow camp performance to directly influence final roster decisions. Typically, teams allow camp performance to decide final outcomes, rewarding the players who earn their place through competition. But in this situation, it increasingly appears that several roster decisions may have been locked in well before training camp fully played out. If that's accurate, then Justine Pat's showing in camp may ultimately have limited impact on her chances, no matter how strong her performances look in real time. That's where comparisons to someone like KK Timpson become a point of frustration for some observers. Based on what has been seen in both domestic and overseas contexts, Timpson has shown flashes of real potential. Her length, athleticism, and shot-blocking instincts stand out, but she has yet to deliver consistent production that clearly locks in a guaranteed roster spot at this stage. Despite that, she appears to be in a more secure position, while Pat, who aligns with one of the most valuable modern archetypes in basketball, remains on the fringe even while reportedly excelling in the areas currently visible during camp. That contrast is what is driving questions around evaluation and decision-making. And when you zoom out to the wider market, the significance becomes even more obvious, because players in the 6 feet 3 inches to 6 feet 4 inches range who can reliably space the floor with three-point shooting while still providing at least functional defensive value are extremely rare. Most of the established names in that category, such as Leonie Fiebig, Sada Sabali, and Brianna Stewart, are already elite-level stars rather than developmental or end-of-roster options. That's precisely why any team that even catches a glimpse of this kind of archetype in a young player like Pat on an affordable contract would naturally feel compelled to take a serious look at her upside. The logic is simple. Why wouldn't they? With more than a dozen franchises across the WNBA, virtually every roster could find a use for a player with her combination of size, shooting, and versatility, and when the financial risk is minimal, the potential reward becomes extremely attractive. Even if a team takes the gamble and it doesn't fully materialize, the ability to move on without long-term consequences only strengthens the appeal of making that move in the first place, which is why there's a strong expectation that if the Fever ultimately decide not to keep her, another organization would likely step in quickly to secure her services. On top of that, injuries inevitably shape every WNBA season, and when they hit, teams immediately begin searching for wings who can provide both size and shooting, making this exact player profile one of the most consistently in demand across the league. Yet, based on current reports, the Fever may not even lean toward elevating developmental talent in those situations, instead preferring to explore the free agent market and bring in veterans on minimum deals. If that approach proves accurate, it would further narrow Pat's path to meaningful minutes in Indiana, creating an increasingly difficult reality to ignore. Despite filling a clear positional need, showing defensive improvement, bringing a refined defensive skill set, and operating on a low-cost contract, she still appears to be outside the team's immediate rotation plans. What makes this entire situation so compelling is that it no longer feels like simple speculation about a roster decision. It increasingly looks like a realistic outcome that becomes more likely with every strong report emerging from camp. The irony sits right at the center of it. The better she performs, the more attention she draws from other teams who begin to see her as a genuine opportunity worth pursuing, and every defensive stop, every visible adjustment, and every flash of that rare two-way potential only pushes her value higher across the league. That leaves Fever fans in a very unusual emotional space, where they are encouraged to appreciate her development while also recognizing that each positive step forward may be accelerating her exit to another franchise, and that tension is what makes this storyline so gripping. Beyond the immediate roster battle, though, this also opens up a broader conversation about Indiana's overall approach to building and developing talent. Because when a team brings in young players with intriguing upside, but does not establish a clear and competitive pathway for them to prove themselves, it naturally raises questions about long-term vision and organizational priorities. In a league where versatile wings with size and shooting ability are among the most valuable and hardest to find assets, the expectation is that smart franchises identify, nurture, and test that potential before it slips away, rather than allowing it to be discovered elsewhere. If Indiana ultimately moves on without fully evaluating what she can become, the risk is not just losing a player, it's potentially watching another organization unlock value that was already sitting in front of them, a scenario the league has seen before when early judgments on young talent later prove premature once those players are given structure, trust, and consistent opportunity elsewhere. That's why this situation extends far beyond a single roster decision and begins to raise a wider, more important question about how the Fever are evaluating talent, developing players, and ultimately maximizing every piece available within their system, or whether there is a real risk that valuable contributors are being overlooked at a critical stage of their growth. Over the next few weeks, all attention will naturally remain fixed on how this unfolds, because the conversation is no longer limited to whether Justine Pat belongs at the WNBA level, an argument that increasingly appears to be leaning toward yes based on what has been reported from camp, but instead has shifted into a much more urgent question of which organization will be the first to fully recognize that potential and commit to giving her a legitimate, consistent opportunity to develop, adjust, and contribute in real game situations at the highest level, and in a league where roster flexibility is limited and competition for specific archetypes is intense. Hesitation can often be the difference between retaining emerging talent and watching another franchise capitalize on it, which is why the possibility of Indiana moving slowly or choosing not to prioritize her development creates a sense of inevitability that another team could step in quickly if given the chance. That uncertainty, combined with the broader implications for roster strategy and talent evaluation, is exactly what makes this one of the most closely watched and discussed developments moving forward in the WNBA landscape right now.